Everybody, I need your attention. Oops. Yeah, Jim will get your attention. All right. Are we ready? We're going to watch a movie and then we're going to start the show. Little presentation, about 10, 12 minutes. So please sit down in your seats and look at the screen and watch this little tribute to my father. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to a celebration of life, honoring Gus Mancuso. Donations to benefit the Las Vegas Jazz Society, Gus Mancuso Memorial Scholarship for Music and the Arts, and the Musical Therapy Program at the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health. I thank you all for coming here to celebrate Gus's life through music. If Gus was one thing, he was a musician. It made up every cell of his being, and it kept him going, playing every day until the end. So before we bring out an amazing group of musicians and friends of Gus to entertain you with a musical tribute, I'd like to share a few memories of the last couple of years of Gus's life, and let Gus do the talking.
That's it. Now practice that. He said, because you got to play tempos like this. Sometimes you got to play a Latin thing. You got to do this. You know, blah blah blah.
So he just showed you like.
He said, if they tell you they want you to play a solo, say okay. I said, and just remember where the time is and how many bars you're playing, and you can just look like you're doing a lot of stuff. Boom, 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 crash, crash, crash.
That's
boom,
awesome.
Boom, boom, the bass drum, crash. So. Sure enough, he left, went in the Army. The guy came by. He said, I'm going to listen to you play. He said, if you play okay. He said, you can come and play with us. He said, you're not old enough, but you'll have to stay on the stand all the time, even when we take a break. I said, it's a deal with me. I still make the money. He said, yeah, you make. I thought it was $5, but somebody told me it was 10. But
oh, wow.
$5. Well, back then
it was a lot of
back
money.
then, and the money went to my mother.
Oh, okay.
And now all my brothers were drafted in the Army, and we had no money coming in. So that's the reason Joe wanted me to get the drums, so I give the $5 or 10 to my mother, and I did that.
Oh.
And I worked the job, and I sat there and I played with the band. The band would take a break, and everybody would leave and go to the bar, and I would sit there for the break. And then when I was playing, sure enough, he'd turn around and say, I want to feature our drummer. He's from 8th grade. He said, this is little Ronnie Mancuso. Play a solo.
That's great.
Bada boom, bada boom, bada boom. You know, that hit some guy in the head here and there, here and there.
So you can play pretty much anything.
That's what I did. I played anything. But I knew how to get, you know, I would go bum bum, bum bum, bum bum. Then the band would come back in.
You would lead the tempo by listening to her?
I took over. Johnny Veith was not allowed to listen to me or Poochie.
Ah.
So Sash just would lean back to me, and she could sing so slow that nobody in the world, the audience was packed. You know, it was packed in there.
Almost made this time we almost made We almost made it this time. This time. This time.
That first tune on from Berlin, Live from Berlin, it's really fast, isn't it?
It's on about.
It was just one of those things, just one of those crazy flings, one of those bells that now and then ring, just one of those things, just one of those nights, just one of those fabulous flights, trip to the moon, gossamer wings, one of those things if we thought a bit of the end of it, how we started painting the town. Been aware that our love affair was too hot not to cool down. Goodbye, dear, and amen. Here's hoping we meet now and then. Great fun, just one of those things.
Now listen, this is serious. We've been in the studio a long time. We're all very tired. I'm extremely tired. Please, no more laughing. Don't tap your foot. No more breaking up. Just concentrate. Please, guys. Okay, here we go.
large here in the Mancuso house?
What?
Are you living large here in the Mancuso house?
What?
How's the food tonight, Pops?
Great!
Dad, what's my name?
I told you, Black Sabbath.
All right, so Edmund's giving Pops a little trim here. Looks pretty handsome, what do you think? I said, who are you? He said, I'm Joanne. You're not Joanne anymore, I hope.
No.
Oh, thank God, we're going to transition you. I'm going to get you a wig and a bra.
Right.
All right, eat your lasagna. We're eating lasagna tonight.
He said,
You got Enzo?
he says,
That me?
Joanne Mancuso.
He came in, I said, how you doing today? He goes, I'm Joanne. I said, Joanne? I feel like Joanne, I think. So maybe, you could be the oldest man to transition, Dad.
Korean.
Why do you think you become Korean? September 12th, 2021.
Happy Thanksgiving. Isn't this beautiful? We're having Thanksgiving with our family. We love each other. I love you. God bless you. It's great. Yeah. Love you. So nice that you're here for Thanksgiving with us.
It hurts plenty.
Yeah, it was good. He made it.
Hi, Gus.
Joy and Joel.
Look at this. How are you? Thanks, how are you? You remember this little lady, Joy?
Ah, so good to see you. Happy Thanksgiving.
He's doing good.
He looks good.
Oh, you kidding? This is Edwin, everybody. Edwin is the reason he's doing good. He's the man.
So good to see you.
It's me, Gus.
Hey, Ronnie.
Remember Ronnie Newman?
Hey, Ronnie. Good to see you, buddy. Thank you so much. Good to see you. I came over to the house that you were resting one day.
Mm-hmm.
I was at the house one day.
Yeah.
A couple months ago. No kidding.
Yeah, everybody comes to visit you, but sometimes you're sleeping.
Yeah, you were resting.
But Edwin got him up, Edwin. Want to eat some pizza?
Oh, later.
Okay.
Thanks, bro.
Okay, let's find a place to put him. Gus is going home, so. Gus passed in my home at 11:59 p.m. on December 8th, 2021. In the preceding days, many came to visit him to say their goodbyes. He lived a long, meaningful life and passed peacefully at home with his family by his side and not in pain. For that, we are grateful. Of course, we are all sad, but we also feel blessed to have had this wonderful time together. So we gather here not in sadness, but to enjoy, to celebrate the life of Gus Mancuso, a master musician, a great friend, and most importantly, a great soul. God bless Gus Mancuso. Now to start the show, Uli Geisendorfer and the Uli Geisendorfer Trio.
Thank you so much. I have to take a moment. These images were just amazing, as well as seeing him play. I was very happy. A couple of years ago, Larry Carroll and I did a little documentary actually on Gus, and we spent several hours with him together as well, talking about music, and he was such a band. That's still the way I remember, and it's seeing all these images. It's very heartwarming. Gus was also one of the first people actually who gave me a gig in town when he still had his jazz series, the Bootlegger. And I never forget playing with him. He was, what an amazing soul, what a real mensch he was, you know. Music, he just radiated beauty and warmth. And now we're very happy to celebrate him in song and dance. We keep the dance to the minimum, but in a lot of songs, and we have amazing performance for you tonight. Well, you know all of them anyways, but you know they're amazing. First, I would like to introduce you to my trio. On the drums, Mr. Angelo Stokes. On the bass, Mr. John Bell's the guy. And now one of the stars of Las Vegas, and the stars wherever he sets foot, any stage he sets foot on, is the very beautiful, very wonderful Mr. Clint Holmes.
So I don't know which mic to use. I guess this is as good as any, right? One. Do we have a winner? I'm honored to be a small part of this celebration of Gus, and the family, the Mancuso family, is part of my family in many ways. Our history here at the Bootlegger, our history here as musicians and entertainers in town. So I'm happy that you invited me, and let me sing this. I did Dennis Bono's show last Thursday, and this is the song I sang because, you know, music makes us happy, music makes us feel bad. This is one of those, for me, if when I hear it or when I sing it, it makes me happy. So since this is a celebration, we'll start with this, okay? And you guys want to sing along with it? You know, please don't, because, yeah. Sing along if you like, just go ahead. Go ahead, Willie. Slow it down a taste. Okay, there we go. Grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worries on the doorstep. Just direct your feet where? Don't you hear that pitter-pat? Let that happy sound be your beat. Come on and just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. I used to walk in the shade, get the blues on parade, but I'm not afraid of this rover crossover. If I never had a cent, I'd be rich like Rockefeller. I'd have gold dust at my feet on the sunny side of the street. Let me whistle a little bit. I'm all out of saliva, so I'll just go back to singing the song. I'll have gold dust at my feet on the sunny side of the street. Let me tell you about I used to walk, I used to walk, I used to walk with my head down in the shade. Ooh, I had the blues on parade, but now this road crossed over. If I never had a cent, I'd be rich like Rockefeller. Gold dust at my feet on the sunny side of the street. Yeah, on the sunny side of the street. On the sunny side of the street. God bless Gus. Thank you. Thank you for letting me be a part of it. Thank you. Is Pete Barbuti applauding? Because if he's not, I'm very upset.
Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, Mr. Clint Holmes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And he has to run off to the Smith Center. Otherwise, we had a plan, actually a whole hour with him. But we'll do that next time. Now I would like to bring someone up that will turn things around, as he has done, I think, for the last several decades. Please put your hands together for Mr. Pete Barbuti.
Hey, well, I don't want to get sad on you because it's not easy to do. Gus was my piano player for about 55 years in this town. And the first gig when I got to town was 1960, January the 1st. And I was working at the New Frontier Hotel. And I met some of the musicians, and they all said, well, do you know Gus Mancuso? He was kind of the guy in town. And I never heard of him, you know. But I did meet him. I did a couple television shows, and they booked me into the Thunderbird Hotel as in the main room, in the showroom. It was like, woo. And Gus got the band for me because I hadn't met him yet, but I called him and I said, everybody seems to know you. So would you get the band? So he got, you older guys are going to remember some of these names. Ernie Mariani on piano. Clyde on drums. Clyde Dool on drums. Gus on bass. And the two horn players were Carl Fontana and Buck Maneri. And there was the guy who was the entertainment director was new at this, and he didn't know how to get the two shows in within the 6 hours. And so he'd run like 15 minutes over. And so I'd tell him, I'd say, you know, we have to pay the band for running over. Okay, I'll fix that. And so he moved up the show, had 50 minutes, but he didn't move up to the back end. So we were still 15 minutes over. This went on and on. And so it was just too much time in between. And we were ready to go on stage one night, and Gus came to me and said, hey, Petey, Buck's on the phone, Buck Maneri. I said, well, we're ready to go on stage. He says, you better talk to him. So I picked up the phone, and Buck said, Petey, he says, I'm drunk. No use coming in. I'll just screw up the show. And I said, Buck, at least have the decency to tell me your car is broken down. Car's running fine. Well, then tell me you're sick. No, I'm not sick. I'm just drunk. So I got Gus. I said, what can you do? And Gus said, nobody can do anything. We just go on and do the show. So I learned that. And one of the songs I used to do to open the show was Up a Lazy River. And I would sing it in the same voice all the way through it. But I would sing like, Up a Lazy River by the old mill stream. And I'd say, Paul Anka. And I wouldn't change anything. Up a lazy river, you know. I would just change all these names and use rather obscure, you know, Tommy Leonetti. And keep singing. And the audience would be looking and say, and they weren't sure, like they said, well, you know, they wouldn't know if he was not very good or if he's very good or what. We, you know, maybe it's our fault. And I turned around and Gus is laughing so hard that he just couldn't play anymore. Well, we became close friends and I took him everywhere. I took him to Seattle. And that was one of the highlights of his life. We'd work a place called the Olympic Hotel. It's now a Four Seasons Hotel, right downtown Seattle. And every morning, Gus, I got him a nice room at the Olympic Hotel, a fancy room. Every morning, he'd go down to the Pike Place Market, and he'd buy all these fresh vegetables and fresh fish. And he'd take it back to his hotel room, and I'd go in his room, and his sink was full of lettuce and carrots and tomatoes and everything. He was just nuts. So the two of us one day were walking down through the Pike Place Market. He talked me into going down there, and we're looking at all those fancy food booths and the seafood and everything. We went in this little shop. They were building it, putting up the shelves, and I said, "What's going on?" The guy said, "Well, we're going to open a shop here, and we're really excited about it." So what do you sell? He said, "We just sell coffee." And I said, "Oh, yeah, hey, Gus, this place is going to go real big. They just sell coffee, man." Well, yeah, you guessed it. It was Starbucks. So now I want to tell you about Gus's musicianship. The Sahara Hotel was kind of like, my home base here in town in the lounge for years. And Jack Eglass, the entertainment director, called and said, "I booked George Shearing in." And George was very excited to hear that you were one of our acts, because I had known George before. We've done some shows together. And he said he's very excited about working with you. So I had Gus on piano, Billy Chris on bass, and Joey Preston on drums. And first of all, we went in, and they had an old Steinway piano at the Sahara Lounge that was older than the hotel. It was a very, very beat-up piano. But it still played okay. And so I said to Jack Eglash, George isn't going to be. He says, "I know." So I ordered a piano. So he called Steinway, and they brought in this big, huge, beautiful piano. So I went down early, and I was playing the piano, and I sounded really good on it. I wasn't that good, but the piano was so good. I sounded really good. And Gus came in, he said, "Whoa, let me at that thing." Gus went over and he started playing. It was just like magic, man. He said, "This is going to be such a gig, We're all excited. And then George came in, and we hugged each other, and he came up on stage, and George played about 2 bars. He said, "This is unacceptable." And Gus and I were both saying, "Yeah, that's what we were saying, George. That piano's terrible. We don't want to play that crappy thing, man." So George was one of those, he was, very big at the time. So George made a phone call, and Baldwin brought in a 9-foot concert grand, and it was different. But George called me in the dressing room one night, and he said, "Petey, who's this piano player you got?" I said, "That's Gus Mancuso." He said, "Boy, he can play some bebop, man." George Shearing was excited about hearing Gus play. That's the level he was at, man. And they don't get any better than that. Well, I took Gus to Seattle, and we used the same bass player and drummer. And everywhere I worked, I had one formula, and that was before I go on, Gus and the trio go on and they play a tune. And people would say, "Well, why do you do that?" It's sort of, I said, because they're that good. I don't care whether you like them or not. They're that good, and they're going to go on. So we were working in Seattle. We had the same guys, and the bass player got sick and couldn't make it. So we had to call the union. That's the kiss of death. You don't know who's going to. And so they sent in some young kid who was obviously a rock and roller. He's, electric bass player, which was okay. And he came in there, and he saw Gus holding the books, the charts. And he said, "Well, is there a lot of reading?" You could tell the kid couldn't read, And Gus said, "Well, yeah, there's a fair amount of playing, And the kid said, "Oh," he said, "Well, what is it, like 6 nights a week?" Gus said, "Yeah, we're dark Mondays, but the rest of the other 6 nights we work." And the kid said, "Gee, I was going to go to a concert on Thursday." And Gus looked at me, and he said to the kid, "Well, if you can send in a sub, then that'd be okay," because we were kind of desperate. And the guy said, "Well, if I can't work the 6th night, I'm not interested in the gig." And he walked out, and Gus looked at me and said, "What did we say, man?" So anyway, we got another bass player as a kid that some of you may know the name. His name was Dean Johnson. Yeah. And he was from Seattle. He was 19 years old. And I told the drummer, whose name was Dave Coleman, I said, "Don't get us a kid, because when Gus goes on to play a tune, he doesn't want to have to rehearse. Gus wants to go on and say, 'We're doing Stranger in Paradise in F,' or he wants to go on and say, we're doing milestones in B flat, or whatever it is. Gus doesn't want to say to the guy, do you know this or something? He wants experienced guys. And so this 19-year-old Gus said, we shouldn't hire him. It's not going to be good, man. He won't. First of all, he'll be able to play the notes in your charts, but I don't want to have to be teaching a guy songs and everything like that. And so anyway, this kid, Dean Johnson, played pretty good, and Gus couldn't stump him. And so one night Gus said, okay, I got him now. I'll pick up some tune he doesn't know. So Gus said, hey, Dean, do you know a tune called My Ship Has Sails? It's like 200 years old, this tune. Yeah? And Dean Johnson says, gee, I'm not sure. And Gus said, well, try to follow me. He was going to teach this punk kid a lesson. So Gus played and the kid played, and then when the song was over, Dean Johnson leaned across the piano to Gus. He said, Gus, remind me on the break, I have some better changes for that song. Gus became Dean Johnson's biggest fan in the world. Everywhere we went, he said, you got to hear this kid play. I brought another bass player down once. I had a trio up in Aspen that I never met before. It was Joe Close on piano, who just played all the big stars, and a drummer named Mike Bono, who's a very good player, and a bass player named Paul Warburton from Denver. And I never heard anybody play like this. The guy was phenomenal. And so I brought him to town. I was working the lounge at Caesars. And after the show, we went out to the San Souci. And Gus was playing out there with Johnny Veith and I think Ed Pucci on drums. And I said, Gus, the bass player I brought in is pretty good. Can he sit in? And Gus said, Petey, not on my bass, man. The sound peg isn't set right. The strings are too high. The action is terrible on it, man. I mean, I'm fighting it every night. I said, well, you want to let him try? He said, well, he's welcome to try if he can, you know. So Paul Warburton went over, he played a couple notes, said, yeah, it's okay, I can do it. So Gus said, fine, if he wants to. So Gus came and sat with me, and Joe Close was playing piano. And they started playing. They played about 8 bars. And Gus looked at me, and he got up, and he grabbed his chair, and he dragged it over to Paul Warburton, the bass player. And he sat in front of the bass and stared at it like this. And he tried to get Paul to stay in town so he could teach, because he was phenomenal. He was just a genius. In fact, when he was 19, he was with Bill Evans. When Scotty LaFaro died, this kid went with Bill Evans, and he played at that level. But Paul had a problem with Demon Rum, so he had to go back home to Denver and take care of his problem. So anyway, Gus he meant so much to me. And it wasn't just the music. I mean, Gus had that sense of humor that I knew he understood where I was going. And I used to do a medley of hit songs from Oklahoma. And I would do them wrong. Like Oklahoma, I would always have an extra beat in it. And then near the end, I would add a beat, so it would come out even over the whole song. But it's just like you hear in a lounge if you go into Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and you know. And then and then I'd sing, the second song, whatever it is. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow, in the corner so high as it grows in the past, and it looks like climbing right up to your eye. And then right in the middle of that, I'd grown accustomed to your face, which is from a different show, you know. And we put these extra beats in. And then Gus had to go up on the strip one night. He worked Gordon McRae, who did the movie Oklahoma. And Gordon McRae would do Oklahoma, and Gus said, I couldn't play it. He kept subtracting and adding beats. I said, no, that's the right way. We used to do a thing. I had this old beat-up trumpet, and I would do this whole story about how I got the trumpet, how I went to New Orleans as a kid, and I couldn't afford a real good. I was taking trumpet lessons, and I had this old beat-up trumpet, or I had like a student model that didn't play real good, you know, and I'd watch these trumpet players come in, Al Hurt and Miles Davis and all, and they all had multi-$1,000 beautiful golden horns. And I used to look at them covetously and think, gee, if I had a horn like that, I could play that good too, you know. And then I explained that it doesn't work that way. And I go through this whole thing about how I remember the day that I learned my lesson about life and music. And I'd say, I remember it like it was yesterday. It's like one of those things you always remember where you were, like, you know, when your kid got married or when the Kennedy assassination. You always remember certain dates are burned into your mind. You remember exactly where you were at that minute. And I'm explaining to the audience where I was, and I say, I'll never forget, I knew everything about it. It was exactly 1:30 in the morning. It was a Monday night, and I was in the kitchen. I was just finishing up, and then Gus would go, psst. And I'd turn around, and of course the audience wouldn't know exactly what's going on. And Gus would call me over, and we'd have this long conversation. Then I'd come back to the mic and say, it was a Tuesday. His timing was so good that, you know, I mean, we'll all miss him. You know, piano players in town all say Gus is the best piano player I ever heard. Carl Fontana, who was, you know, the genius trombone player, the best in the world, no question, the best in the world. Carl Fontana said that of all the piano players I've worked with, Gus is the best. He lays down exactly the voicings that I want to hear, and that enables me to do what I do. He was just the best piano player. He was. I took his Christmas tape down. I was working a show in L.A. As a matter of fact, with Eddie Fisher, who didn't know me, didn't know who he was at the time. And it was an industrial show, and all the L.A. guys were there, all the top guys, you know. And so I had this Christmas tape that Gus had just made. And I said, listen to this, and I played it. And I said, who's on trumpet here? And Don Menza was the first. He said, that's Miles, man. That's Miles Davis. I said, no, it's not. And, you know, so Wayne Bergeron would say, no, I think that's Clifford Brown, isn't it? No, nobody could guess. So I said, it's Gus. And they all went, that's Gus on trumpet? I said, yeah, he was that good on trumpet. And he only picked it up like once in a while. And he was that good. Baritone horn, of course, was his instrument. But he also played unbelievable trombone. Not valve trombone, slide trombone. He played with Woody Herman and played with just about everybody. So, but I'll miss him because, not just for his musical ability, but for 50 years, I never had to worry about, is the piano player going to know what I'm talking about? When I say, give me a country song, am I going to have to say, I need it in the key of G, and it goes boom, ching, boom, ching. Gus knew exactly what I meant. He was everything, and he's, if you're an entertainer and you have that guy who knows everything about you and loves you. And we also had another hobby. We were into gardening, and Gus had a huge garden everywhere he went. And I talked him into buying one of those. I bought one of those tillers that you just walk and it tills up the ground. Boy, he just loved that. And he had these big garden go. And then we'd read the gardening books. We'd take him in the band room and read the gardening. Forgive me for this, but I'm just remembering. We're in the band room one day, and there was, I'm afraid, a bit of drinking back in there at the Sahara. And we were back there, and Rudy Ackles was the bass player, very good player. And Joey Preston was on drums, and Gus on piano. And so it was my dressing room, but everybody hung out in there because they didn't have that many rooms. So everybody was hanging out in there. And I was left, and Joey came out and said, you better go in there. Gus and Rudy are arguing. It doesn't sound like they're having fun. So I went in there, and Gus was talking about Miles Davis wasn't doing anything serious anymore. He said, Miles Davis is just, he's just blowing off the people, and it's not. And Rudy was saying, no, it's just that you don't understand him. And Gus was saying, don't tell me that, man. I worked with Sarah Vaughan, and she said, Miles is a joke now. He's not playing good music anymore. And this. Anyway, they were arguing back and forth with this. And it was quite a heated argument. And then Gus said, and I have to preface it by telling you, during the show, we had a chart that Carl Fontana wrote on, If You Were the Only Girl in the World. It's a very old song. And if you were the only girl. And he wrote incredible chord changes. And everywhere I've taken it and shown it to people, they say, oh, this is like the way I'm going to play it from now on. And Rudy didn't get the music up, and he played some bad notes. And Joey Preston, the drummer, had great ears. And Joey would say, Rudy, why don't you get the music up, man? You played some bad notes. And Rudy was saying, Joey, you're just a drummer. You don't know what you're talking about. And so this whole thing started. So I got in the dressing room, and Gus was arguing with Rudy. He said, Rudy, I want to tell you something. He says, I don't know if you know this, but I was in the Army, and I was overseas. People don't know that, but my brother, my older brother, was in the Army, and he was overseas. He was in combat. And my mother went to church, and she swore that if you send my son home, I'll go to Mass every single morning. And her son came home unharmed, and she did. She never missed a day. She went to Mass 7 days a week. And Gus said, and knowing this, here I am overseas, and I got wounded. It wasn't serious, but some shrapnel hit my foot. And it was, it was an excruciating pain. And as much as it hurt, man, I kept thinking my poor mother, who's going to tell her that her little boy Gus is wounded in combat. She's going to go through, say, says, the important thing is you can't tell my mom. And he says, and this thing hurts so bad. It wasn't that serious, but it's just where it was in my foot, and it hurt so bad. And I was crying like a baby, man. And as much as that hurt, Rudy, I'd rather go through that 9 more times than to play that song with you even once. And I ran out of the room. I said, that is the evilest thing you have ever said. And he laughed for 2 days over there. Anyway, we worked at a place in Seattle called the Trojan Horse, a Greek family. So after Saturday night when the joint closed down, Alec Gotsis, the guy who owned it, took us in the bar, and he opened the Metaxa and all the, Ouzo and everything. And we sat there, and there was no charge. So everything, and he fixed some food. And anyway, we went to bed we were staying at the Olympic, went to bed, and we got up the next morning, and we were both feeling kind of bad. And I had an invitation. There's a friend of mine that I had known a long time in Seattle. He was an internationally known cardiologist, and he bought a house on Hood Canal, which is it's seawater, and it's a canal that runs through northwestern Washington. And so I said, Gus, we got to go over there. He's expecting us. They have an oyster bed right in front of his place, right in the canal, right in the water. And they have like 30 million oysters. You just go out and pick them up. And Gus said, oh, man, I love oysters. Let's go. So we were riding in. It was a long way. And we were going through this real rural countryside. There was nothing there, man. And I was driving. I was going slow, We're driving. And Gus said, stop the car right here. I thought he was going to be sick. And Gus got out of the car, and there was a big field. And he walked around this field about 4 times. I thought he's looking for a place to barf. He walked. Then he came back to the car, and he got in. I said, what's all that about? He said, I've been scouting this location. I'm looking for a place to build a used Rico Reed store. I mean, anyway, we go to this place, and the place was on Hood Canal, and there were more oysters than you can see. I mean, millions of oysters. And the guy who owned it, there were like 8 or 9 people there. And he said, his name was Kenny Iyer, the cardiologist, and he said, have all the oysters you want. Well, there were like 3 ladies there, wives of guys who were there, and they start shucking oysters for Gus. And we roast them on the grill and put some in the oven. And then he ate some raw, and they gave him a half-gallon jar of oysters. There must have been 30 million oysters, shucked, just the oysters in there to take home. He took them on the plane with him. So Gus, this was a marvel to Gus to see these oysters. So they said, Gus, here are the boots. Put on these boots and grab the pail and just go out there. Here's some gloves. And he went out and he was picking oysters, and he said, does it matter? No, anyone at all. He was picking them, and he brought them in. The girls were shucking them. He said, I'm going back for more. And he went back. He was in his glory, man. So then it was late at night. We all went to bed. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear all this doors banging and everything. And I hear footsteps, and then I hear running, and Gus comes running into the front door screaming, they're gone! Somebody stole them! They're all gone! And Kenny said, Gus, the tide is in. Gus was sure that somebody had come by in the middle of the night and stole like 30 million oysters. Anyway. Well, to say I'll miss him is, I'll think of him every day, because he was my buddy, man. And we were friends for so many years, and he's been to my house, and I've been to his house, and we used to do this thing with the gardening books in the dressing room, and we'd say, Gus, I can plant some trees, man. I want to put in like some almond trees. He said, yeah. He says, I like it, but everything in the guide says bears fruit in the 6th year. Bears fruit in the 7th year. And so Gus had this theory. We say, look, you know what's going to happen? We're going to plant these trees, and in year 5, we're going to have a heart attack and die. and our wife's going to marry a Latino guy named Raul. And Raul's going to put a hammock between our two almond trees, and he'll be swinging there where our old lady is shucking the nuts and handing them to Raul, and we'll be rotting away in our grave. So any tree that takes more than a year, do not order it, man. Anyway, that was our mantra for, well, I'm glad so many people came here tonight, and so many friends of Gus that know him and worked with him and know that he truly was a genius. Every instrument he played, and he also sang, you know. He had a vocal group in Seattle called anybody remembers? The Signatures. That was the original group, and then it was the Gus and Us. Gus and Us was the first group. Then he worked with the Signatures. Bob Alcivar wrote most of the charts. Carl Saunders, you know, is probably the #1 jazz trumpet player in the world. Carl is ill, just went through some surgery, and he called and said, you know how I feel about Gus, man. And we did a jazz festival in Seattle once that they didn't advertise. And we worked this thing for 3 days, and there weren't more than 3 people in the audience at one time, and nobody got paid. But the band was, the rhythm section was Santo on drums, Gus on piano, Billy Chris on bass, and we had 3 decent horn players, Carl Fontana, Carl Saunders, and Joe Romano. And just having them play all night just for their own enjoyment and sitting there listening was just, it was one of those things. Anyway, Carl Saunders he's crazy, but he's the best jazz trumpet player in the world. Thank you, Yuli. So Carl sent this to me, he emailed it to me. And it's over 4 hours. So I'm going to paraphrase some of it, because I know some of you people have something to do. I know I do. I have 4 hookers in a camper out back. I just say things like that to shock you, I swear. That's not true. I have no idea how many are out there. Well, Carl talks about being here in the old days, in the 60s and 80s, when the best musicians in the world were here. Better than L.A. or New York. I mean, the top guys, you know, Buddy Childers, Charlie Walp. You know, you can't even name the guys who were here at the time. Herbie Phillips. I mean, Don Overberg, guitar player, one of the best men. It was very good. And he talks about when you first came here, you're supposed to put your card in, and they called it sweating your card at the union. Frank can tell you that. But if you were somebody like Gus, you picked up the phone and you called and somebody heard you play and said, well, I do this and I do that. You're special, so you went to work. Anyway, it says his main instrument was baritone horn, and he probably did it because nobody else was doing it. Because there was no, baritone horn is for marching bands. He said, Gus and I work Russ Black band at the Flamingo. He sat right in front of me in the trombone section. We played people ranging from Ella Fitzgerald to Wayne Newton back in the 60s. Slide trombone is another instrument from a valve trombone. It's a different world, and yet Gus was the best trombone player he ever worked with. Carl Saunders said that. He said, also, I know you work with Woody's band. He talks about vibes he played. You know, Red Norvo, Terry Gibbs were second to Gus. He was just amazing. Big band concert at the Tropicana, and they had a vocal group that Bob Alcivar wrote. He was a wonderful arranger, wrote the charts for. Gus was singing all the special parts. He learned them all. Carl said, I used them all the time. He was so fluent on all the instruments that it took a great deal of woodshedding, a great deal of practice. But those of us who knew him know that Gus is one of those guys who could play all day and all night. It never bothered him. Carl says he was the best bass player he ever worked with, and he worked with like Carson Smith here in town, and he said he swung more than everybody. He worked with Sarah Vaughan. I guess most of you read that thing in the paper about the joke he played on Sarah Vaughan. They were in Europe it wasn't real detailed in the paper. They were in Europe, and somebody in the audience yelled out "My Reverie," a song Sarah Vaughan had recorded years ago, but she hadn't done it for years, and she just didn't remember it. And she stood there frozen, and time says, "I'm so sorry, I love that song, but I haven't done it in so long, I just don't remember." And somebody yelled out, "But you recorded it." She says, "Yeah, but when you record it, you have the sheet music in front of you, you know, for like as a crutch, so you don't forget it." And she knew Gus was a singer, so Gus leaned forward and said, "Sass, you want to do that tune? I know the hell out of it. I'll help you with it." And she said, "Oh, all right, with the help of my bass player, I'd like to sing My Reverie." So she sang the first 4 bars, which she remembered. Then she leaned back, and Gus leaned forward and said to her, "B flat minor 7th." Well, she started laughing, and that was the end of that show. Because no matter what song she was singing, Gus would say, "G minor," she would break up again. He was just, and when Gus was leaving, he got Bob Magnuson the job, bass player from San Diego. He got Bob Magnuson the job, and they rehearsed at Gus's house. Sarah Vaughan was there, and Bob Magnuson came in, and Sarah had one chart in there written by Richard Davis, the genius bass player from New York. And Richard Davis wrote this chart. Nobody could play it. Only Richard Davis could play it. I mean, it was that complicated. And so Gus never played it, and Sarah Vaughan never did it. She said, "It doesn't make sense." And so they got Bob Magnuson there, and Sarah Vaughan said, you know, Gus put her up to it. She said, "All right, get up that Richard Davis chart." And Bob Magnuson looked at it, and he looked at it again, and he looked at Sarah Vaughan, and then he ran out into the backyard and threw up. And then, of course, they both laughed and brought him in. He was a wonderful player and lasted a long time. Anyway, Carl just says he's, you know, he just misses Gus a lot because he was special, and he worked with him a lot, and Carl Saunders is like the guy. And he learned from Sam Noto, which was I have a tape, and I wish some more of you have. In fact, Ronnie may even find it in Gus's archives. It's a little tape cassette. One night, Sam Noto came to Gus's house. It was about 3:30 in the morning. It was loaded. And he banged on the door, and Gus let him in. He had been in a fight and had a couple of cuts and bruises. And he came in. He was still drunk, and he sat down. He was blathering on to Gus. And Gus said, "You got your horn?" Gus wouldn't talk to him. He said, "Yeah, bring your horn in." And Gus plugged a Fender bass in, the little amp he had in there. And they played some blues. It was about maybe 15, 20 choruses. And I've played it for some people, and they say, it is the best clinic I've ever heard in my life on jazz. There's 2 guys in a kitchen. It's amazing. But Gus was special. He was not only special to his family and friends, but to the musicians. And damn, he's just a good guy, and I'm going to miss him forever and ever. And thanks, all of you guys, for coming around. Yeah. Incidentally, Gus, I didn't know it until after a while, but Gus, Joey Preston, and I were all stationed at a military base in Virginia called Camp Pickett, Virginia, which was the hellhole of the world. It was the worst place. The humidity was 100% every day, and there were bugs everywhere, and it was just horrible. Anyway, we didn't know it until we finally got together. We're trading Army stories. And I know Tom is here, and he was, I think, was it Fort Lee or? Fort Lee. We was stationed with Gus, and he remembers Gus. No matter where he was, and no matter what he did, he within a day they heard him play, and he was just the man. That's all there is. So anyway, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Pete Beauty. And now, Carl, through Pete, and Pete mentioned all the instruments he played. That's one of the things we do tonight. We showcase several instruments that Gus was so proficient on. And the next event we have for you are the Boneheads. And Kurt Miller is leading the Boneheads, and I have the good chance to play with already like 6 years, and we're working on our 2nd record. And so I hear some commotion in the back. I think the guys got the word now. Yes, you're on. Yes. So you will see 6 bones. 6 bones sound amazing. And there's the first bone. Sonny Hernandez, followed by a percussionist. You're on the wrong gig, dude. Just kidding. It's Gabriel Falcone. By the way, give it up for our soundman, Mr. Gabriel Falcone, and back in the mix-up, Mr. Jim Moran, making all sound so good. So here are the Boneheads, which was a group that Gus was very, very fond of. Not only because he played trombone, but he was part of it. And so we're gonna do a couple songs that actually not only are somewhat dedicated to him, but where he had a hand in the arrangements. And you see the stage is filling up. It is not 72 trombones, it's just 6, I promise you. And please welcome the bass player of the Boneheads, Mr. Steve Flora. Give it up for Mr. Kurt Miller, please.
Thank you. So, very quick story. One of the reasons we chose this song tonight is when Gus moved to Vegas in the late 50s, he and Carl Fontana roomed together for a while. And they decided to put together this arrangement of If I Only Had a Brain in a samba format. Some of you may have seen some of the YouTubes around with Carl playing with like Pete Jolly and some guys on If I Only Had a Brain. That arrangement and that style of that tune was created by Gus and Carl in their apartment back in the late 50s. And it's what inspired this arrangement we did for the Bonehead CD about 4 years ago. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. been about 3 years since the groups played together. So it's nice to get back together. This next song, I Loves You, Porgy, from the famous songs and all the other songs that accompany that. We chose this tonight because when we did the CD about 4 years ago, Gus told Ralph that this was just one of his favorite cuts on the CD. So we thought it would be appropriate to go ahead and play this. I used to introduce this as I Loves You, Porgy. And all the guys used to make fun of me, but I always thought, well, you know, consenting adults don't get together to have an orgy. They have an orgy, right? So, you know, I don't know. Thank you so much. Since we got time for one quick one. Is that all right? Yeah. This is called I Thought About You, and that's what we're doing with Gus right now.